welcome to CryptoCast, episode 3 of Tales from the Past. I'm Ray Doherty. Thanks for joining me, brought to you by the Australian Yowie Project, as we travel back through time and we read the strange and mysterious stories of yesteryear's newspapers, digitised by the National Library of Australia and trove.nla.gov.au. Please like this video and please consider subscribing to my channel and help it to grow. The more you can help spread the word, the more CryptoCasts I can bring you for your listening enjoyment into the future. We have a few cracking stories for you in this episode, so sit back and relax as we travel back through time. The first story today comes from the Monaro, Mercury and Coomera and Bombala Advertiser. Wednesday, the 18th of August, 1886. Titled the Gingera Yahoo. Now, before we start, Gingera is a locality today in the snowy Monaro region of New South Wales. It lies south of Captain's Flat and northeast of Bredbo. At the 2016 census, it had a population of just 39 people. So I don't know how many live there today. But the Gingera Yahoo. Fascinating story. Let's get into it. Whilst a young man named Flint was looking after stock at the back of Bredbo Station one afternoon last week, he was surprised to observe a hairy human form about 7 feet in height walking the bush. The wild man walked with an unsteady, swinging and fast step, his arms bent forward and nearly reaching the ground, whilst the colour was described as bay, a cross between red and chestnut. Flynn did not take a second look at this uncanny creature, but rode as fast as he could to the homestead of Mr. Crimmings, nearly 2 miles away, to whom he reported the strange and mysterious affair. Since then, Mr. Crimmings himself has interviewed about the monster, and his account tallies exactly with that given by Mr. Flynn. But Mr. Crimmings heard the animal make the cry that sounded very much like Yahoo! We hear that Mr. Joseph Hart of Gingera also saw the Yahoo as he was returning home one afternoon. The strange being is, no doubt, the wild man that has been so often talked about Gingera for many years past. It is the intention of Bredbo and Gingera residents to scour the bush in strong body and capture the monster, alive or dead. For this purpose, they will meet. The team, or the people, will meet at Mr. Kelly's Hotel in Little Palm on Monday next to organise their forces and to obtain a supply of ammunition. Should they capture the wild man alive, it is hoped that the men of Bredbo and Gingera will feed him up and keep him until the Centennial Exhibition is open. You know what I love about these stories? That today, these are just suburbs of towns and suburbs of cities. But back then they were wild, woolly times and wild, woolly areas. It was almost, I guess, it would have been like the Wild West, but, it was incredible stories to think that places that we live now and take for granted were actually pioneering areas, that the indigenous people lived traditionally, and that these things were walking around and they were common knowledge. Sometimes we've got to go back to the past to get the truth. This was in 1886, granted, a fair while ago. But to get such detailed accounts of this area, Gingera, home to 39 people, maybe a few more now, maybe less, I don't know. But fascinating nonetheless. Now, we've got a very interesting Bunyip story. In fact, we'll have a couple. We've got this one certainly in this episode, which is great. And then we're going to have more, including bunyips, moving forward, and strange lights and UFO sightings back in the pioneering days. This is interesting stuff, and it's exciting to read it. Now, this one is from the Forbes Advocate. Friday, the 16th of September, 1949, in a place called Deniliquin. Perhaps some of you live in Deniliquin, but here's a little bit of background about Deniliquin. Deniliquin, also known locally as Denny, is a town in the Riverina region of New South Wales, close to the border with Victoria. It is the largest town in the Edward River Council local government area. Deniliquin is located at the intersection of the Riverina and Cobb Highway, approximately 725 kilometres southwest of Sydney and 285 kilometres due north of Melbourne. The town is divided in two parts by the Edward River, a branch of the Murray River, with the main business district located on the south bank. Now, it's very important to consider this story here because it says, Bunyip seen by very sober men. Now, you've got to remember a couple of things. At that time, 1949, a lot of guys came back from the war. A lot of guys had drinking problems because of what they call shell shock, or what we call PTSD then. Also, things that we call recreational drugs today were available by prescription in the general community until they were made illegal. So not only did we have a lot of people drinking a lot, but we had a lot of people taking drugs back those days too to help them, and especially those with PTSD. So this is why a big emphasis on sober men and people of good character from stories of those days. But let's read this story because this is absolutely fascinating and I think you'll like it. Bunyip seen by very sober men. The Murray River monster has reappeared in a billabong on Hardwood Station near Deniliquin. And Deniliquin is asking, is the monster a bunyip, a musk duck, or some mystery animal? But Mr. P. Crosby Morrison, editor of Wildlife, says the monster is just an ordinary seal. Jim Rowan and Claude Holden, well-known Deniliquin contractors, were filling in a washaway at a billabong weir on Hardwood Station last Thursday when a splash attracted Howe's attention. Rowan's first glance, Holden's attention, Rowan's first glance saw a small log in the middle of a stream. Suddenly, the log came to life. With a series of short leaps, it sped towards the weir. Rowan thought the object must have been a dog until it vanished beneath the water, and he was ready to forget about it when the monster broke the water again near where Holden was standing. Subtitled, They're Crazy. They saw the monster clearly for 30 seconds, but kept quiet about it until Monday because no one would believe such a story, but both agree on several points. They saw something they had never seen before. It was alive and amazingly fast. It was almost black with a shiny body 3 foot long and a neck 18 inches long, almost as thick as its body. When upright, its head was at least 2 feet above the water level and 2 huge ears on each side of its head. Nearly 2 years ago, several men gave a similar description for a monster they saw in the Murray River near Swan Hill. Mr. Crosby Morrison said, on the evidence, it would seem that it was a seal. Seals can live in fresh water without any trouble, and very occasionally one makes its way up the Murray. It is believed that the seals in the Murray originally gave the indigenous people the idea of the bunyip. Well, what do you think of that? A seal? Well, I've done a little bit of digging into this, and all I can find is that seals had been known to go up the Murray chasing fish, but not too far. We're talking 200 k's, 170 k's from Melbourne. Now, we know their seals live in Port Melbourne, but 200 k's? Perhaps you have a thought about this. Perhaps you have some knowledge about it. You know something about it? Please let me know in the comments below whether or not if you know if seals have travelled that far up the Murray. I also found there are only 2 or 3 species of true freshwater seals, one in Russia and the other one in Alaska or British Columbia. Either way, the rest of them are live in the salt water, but they do travel up to fresh water. So, is the bunyip from this area in Deniliquin a seal? Something that can't be ruled out. If you know anything about it, write comments below, let us know. Now this one is even more equally as fascinating. This is another bunyip story, but the great thing again is that we've got locations for these things to check out. And I lived in Melbourne for a short time back in the early 90s, but I've never made my way over to a place called Bacchus Marsh, because this is the Bacchus Marsh Express. Saturday, 15th of December, 1866. Now, Bacchus Marsh is an urban centre, suburban locality in Victoria, located approximately 50 kilometres northwest of Melbourne and 14 kilometres west of Melton, at a near equidistance of the major cities of Melbourne, Ballarat and Geelong, so it seems like it's in the middle. The population of Bacchus Marsh in June 2018 is 22,223, and it's the largest urban area in the local government shire of Moorabool, sort of Victorian friends. I'm a Queenslander, what can I say? It's very hard to pronounce some of these things. The Bunyip. This story was in the Geelong Register, as I said, Saturday, December 15th, 1866. Bunyip. The Geelong Register contributes the following Bunyip story. Considerable interest. God, I love the way they wrote in those days. Considerable interest, not to say excitement, has occurred recently at a settlement at Stony Creek. In the rear of the settlement is situated a large swamp, which forms an important part of the watershed which is to supply Geelong with water. For some considerable time, strange noises have proceeded from this swamp, which cannot be credited to any known animal. There appears to be at least two of them, for there is a cry and an answering cry, and the noises occur nightly. Of course, numerous attempts have been made to obtain a sight of these strange amphibious animals, but as the swamp is of considerable size and densely covered with reeds, any shy amphibious animal might conceal itself during the day. There are not wanting some, however, who assert they have been fortunate enough to obtain a glimpse of it, and they describe it as being of dark colour, shading lighter towards the belly, and about half the size of a calf. The best authenticated case was thus reported to us. One of the residents, in his rambles near the swamp, saw an unusual object, dark and about the size described. The distance was, however, too great for him to ascertain further particulars. He accordingly sent out one of his children to a neighbour's for the loan of a telescope, while he himself remained on the spot. The party in question, opinioning that the instrument was required for the day's sport, proceeded very deliberately to take it to pieces and then carefully cleaned it before he sent it to his friend. Of course, it came too late. The swamp will be drained when the reservoir is complete, and there are many who are resolved to keep a good lookout for this period for this mysterious inhabitant. Who knows? But the mystery of the Bunyip may yet be cleared up. Wow. Precise locations. And if that was drained, does it exist today? I know there's a swamp still there near that reservoir. But does the Bunyip still live there? Was it a seal? If it was a seal, like the other report, how the hell did it get in a swamp when there's no river that runs to it? If you're in Victoria and you're looking this up, let me know in the comments. I would really, really love to know more. Now, we've got one more story, and this is a very, very interesting story, and I've got to apologise for this story before I start. A lot of these stories that are written in the old days, I've had to edit very, very heavily because by today's standards, they would be very offensive. And some of the languages that they use and the terms they use in relation to our Indigenous Australians, they're not very flattering, and I've had to remove as much of it as I could without affecting the integrity of the story. This one is clearly written by a skeptic who lives in the area, but he knows quite a number of elder Indigenous people. But this was published in the Cairns Post on Friday, the 16th of February, 1934. 1934. What's that, around about 86 years ago. This is centred around the Auburn River, which is now a national park and is protected in the North Burnett region, Hervey Bay, Queensland, Australia. It is northeast of the locality of Harkwood, extending into southern Dyke Head. If you know the area, it's out towards Gayndah and Eisvold, And if you're an active researcher and you know those areas, then you know why you know those areas. There's very, very large amounts of Yowie sightings over the years out in this direction and out in this region, and particularly in the South Burnett. Now, the Auburn River, I hadn't heard this one before, but it is fascinating. And if you look up the location on maps or pictures, you will see that there are so many caves and so many hiding spots. Of course, it's all about the fresh water. So let's read. This is a long story, and this will finish us off, but have a good listen to this. Called The Hairy Man. What a shock. The tribe that inherited the country about the Middle Auburn River in southeast Queensland had an outstanding superstition in the hairy man who lived in the haunted cave at the Earlburn Falls. In this instance, there were no skeptics. Every member of the tribe believed that he was there, and like Devil, an evildoer, they actually say Devil, but I think it's a misprint, the Devil, an evildoer. No one ever saw an Indigenous person approaching the cave, even in the daytime and at night, and they would not camp within miles of it. Still, in the remote past, some of them must have ventured sufficiently close to have heard the hairy man at work and observed the products of his activities, for those who had never seen the cave could give a fairly accurate description of the interior. It was flood time, that the hairy man was always busy, and it was said that he made the loudest noise as he chopped away with his tomahawk at a varied assortment of sticks in his workshop. It must be conceded that there was some ground for this belief in the existence of the hairy man. The country in the vicinity had a weird appearance. The river near the falls contained elongated and deep, dark waterholes, overshadowed by frowning cliffs. Along the edge grew giant gums and curving trees with dense foliage. Close by were masses of semi-tropical undergrowth which in places merged into dense scrub. It was an ideal place to conjure phantoms of unreal and the fantastic. The falls were more in the nature of a series of rapids rather than a sheer drop, and in flood time the roar of the seething waters could be distinctly heard from more than 10 miles away. Behind the first leap, the principal one, was the cave. Beyond the entrance, it was enclosed by a granite whirlpool, where logs and sticks brought down the river were drawn in and rapidly swirled around and around, continually striking against the hard, rocky walls, and thus producing the thundering sounds which locals believe were caused by the hairy man at work. Contact with the rock also wore away and rounded the ends of the sticks as evenly as they had been put through a turning lathe. When the rainy season was over and the water in the cave gradually receded, most of the sticks now, with the oval ends, remained. So neatly done was the rounding process, it would have been hard for anyone not knowing the circumstances to realize that it was not the work of a man. Subtitled Belief Shared by Some Europeans. The local Indigenous people believed that if the sticks operated on the way the hairy men were removed from the cave, they would eventually find their way back there again. Strange as it may appear, the belief in the haunted cave, the hairy man, and the migratory sticks was shared by some of the early pioneers, an instance of tradition influencing culture. As late as some 20 years ago, a gathering of about 200 local Indigenous people would be seen at a corroboree at Harkwood Station, not far from the halls, but they have since dwindled. At that time, I knew a local man, rather past middle age, known to the settlers as Chapman. He claimed to be the rightful chief of the tribe. He could speak English well, and since Chapman and the most of the greybeards of that time had gone the way of their ancestors. That's a very unflattering way of saying that they had died, but as I said, I've edited this as much as I could. The last time I saw Chapman was in the bush. As the day was hot, we both dismounted and rested for a time in the shade. The conversation turned on the hairy man. I told him there was no hairy man, that I examined the cave and found no one there. He replied that he was always there at night. I inquired if he'd ever seen or heard the hairy man. His answer was in the negative, but he averted that the hairy man was there all the same. Then he got a short, thick stick and began tapping the ground with it. at the same time explaining that the sounds he made were similar to those produced by the hairy men when at work. I informed him that I intended visiting the cave at night, and thus would prove to him that there was no hairy man. He at once seemed concerned and implored me not to do so, and if I did, that some serious evil would sure overtake me. After a time of conversation turned upon other matters, but I could see that he was ill at ease. Before leaving, I promised him that I would not visit the cave by night. On another occasion, whilst riding out after the cattle, I met an aged local man who I knew. His long, flowing beard and heavy moustache and straggly hair were quite white. He was walking very fast and looked tired and despondent. I pulled up and asked him where he was going. He replied that he did not know, but he wanted to get as far away from the falls as he could, that the hairy man was very angry and making big fellow noise. We would then be 4 or 5 miles from the falls. As the breeze was from that direction, the thunderous roar was very pronounced. So that story, a lot of these stories have no follow-up. But what he was saying in this, if you could catch my meaning, was that the last gentleman he came across said, I just want to get away from these things, the falls, the hairy man, the big fella, not in a good mood. He's making a lot of noises. He's very upset. And then it finishes with the writer hearing what sounds like some call or vocalization. Wow. That's pretty impressive stories. Some big ones today. A couple of bunyips, the Gingera Yowie, and now the Auburn River hairy man. Thank goodness the Australian government over the years has kept these newspapers, so otherwise these stories would be lost. And it's my privilege to bring them alive a little bit to you through this podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I've hoped you've liked the little changes I've made to the podcast, but hopefully they've worked out well. Next time we will have some more equally fascinating crypto stories from yesteryear for you to digest and enjoy. If any of you know these areas or have been out in the areas before, as I said, let me know in the comments. If not, that might be a good place to start investigating. Until next time, friends, bye for now.